Hey, everybody. Thanks for stopping in, giving me a couple minutes of your day. I want to talk about mission focus and tactical excellence today for a little bit. Uh, what I what I have to say, what I'm going to talk about, applies to anybody who goes to a fire. Uh, it doesn't matter if you're the least senior member of your organization, all the way up to the fire chief, company officer, whatever. It applies. But I'm really targeting my comments to the company officers and the chief officers who are on shift work, because there's no doubt in my mind, and I've been on both sides. I've been a company officer, I've been a shift commander, and then I've been a staff chief, and I've been in those positions for a long time. And there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever at all that the company officers and the shift work chiefs truly mold the culture. They build the environment, they set the expectations. They're the ones that drive the train. And if we want to talk about mission focus and tactical excellence, it's really on the company officers and the shift work chiefs to ensure that's what's happening in their firehouse, with their company, on their shift, their platoon, their division, whatever configuration it is that you're commanding, it's really on you. Now, I can say this for an absolute fact because I know it for a fact. Fire chiefs do some dumb things, okay? Fire chiefs make dumb decisions. Fire chiefs write stupid policies. No doubt about it whatsoever at all. But think about that for a second. If we focus in on what the fire chief's doing, that person is in the workplace 40 hours a week. Okay. In the shift that we're working, if we're working a 24-hour shift, they're only there for a third of the shift. And unless they're quartered in your firehouse, they're not even physically in your workplace. If you're on a 48 and you're working Saturday, Sunday, they're not even anywhere near you. So don't give up the ability you have to influence and control your environment to somebody you have no control over. And before I get into the specifics that I want to talk about today, I'm going to talk about a couple of examples. When I was a battalion chief, I'm sitting in the firehouse one day drinking coffee. Everybody's sitting around the table, and the company officer goes to me. He says, "Hey, man, you realize that the fire chief has got one of them particle board desks, but the police chief has got a solid wood cherry desk?" And I'm looking at the company officer like, what does that matter? What does that have to do? And I asked him, what does that have to do with you and what you're doing here at your company? Well, that just goes to show you that the cops get everything and we get nothing. And the firefighters who are sitting at the table, they're just sitting there rolling their eyes like, here goes the captain again. Don't think about that. What does that really have to do with the mission? If that's so big an issue to you, then go be a cop. Just that simple. Maybe the fire chief, and it's not maybe, I know this for a fact. The fire chief's fighting for resources and staffing and everything else, but he's hitting some roadblocks at City Hall. The budget director, the city manager, is not giving the fire chief the things that the fire chief is asking for. So all these conversations, all detracting from the ability to focus on the mission, to get ready for that run that's going to come in at some point in time. It's taking away from our ambition to go out and train for the worst run that we're ever going to go to, because we hear this constant drumbeat in the firehouse of woe is us and we don't get what we need and blah, blah, blah. Company officers, shift work chiefs control that. So if that's going on in your firehouse, first off, don't be the one who does that. And second off, if it's going on in your firehouse, get a handle on it. Control it. Now, the reason why I'm, doing this video, and I'm doing the video so I can post it on Facebook, and I can also put it up on my YouTube channel. I'm not a real tech guy, and I can only do things one way. But I think this information is important, and I want it to be up on my YouTube channel also. So all this came about, I'm having a conversation with a friend of mine. Maybe they're a male, maybe they're a female. I'm not going to discuss who they are. I'm not going to give details, but they're a company officer in a big fire department. And they're telling me the story about, they caught a run a couple weeks ago. And it came in as a building fire in a senior citizen apartment complex. Well, this company was first out of their firehouse. Okay, they were first on the scene. They got the primary location. They're the first one to the floor. They've got indication that they got smoke on the floor. They force the door. They get inside the apartment, and they find a victim in there. So they bring the victim out seamlessly. As soon as they get the victim out in the hallway, they transition. They carry the victim down to the ambulance. That person is intubated alive. Now, I don't know if they survived the incident or not. And, all we can do is the best that we can do. But there's a couple things that really play into mission-focused tactical excellence that comes from this very incident and the story that this person told me. So, first off, it ended up being food on the stove. Okay, it wasn't an apartment fire, it wasn't a building fire, it wasn't a contents fire. It was food on the stove. But food on the stove smoked up the apartment so bad that it incapacitated the resident who couldn't self-evacuate. And that person was removed from the apartment, but it was a critical ALS treat. They were intubated. They were in the ICU. And like I said, I don't know what the final outcome is. And as I said, all we can do is the best we can do at the scene. But that's the very first thing for officers to start talking to their people. There is no insignificant incident, because when we say, it was just this, it's just that, after the fact, then we start saying it when we get dispatched. And then we start to get a little bit complacent. Then we start to slow down a little bit. Then we lose that mission focus that allows us to be tactically excellent. So a pot of food on the stove ended up with an actual grab and an ALS treat. So there are no insignificant incidents. Maybe after the fact, when we get back to the firehouse, we can say, it turned out to be nothing. But whatever we go to is significant. How many times have fire departments been dispatched to a sick subject? And it's like, it's just a sick subject. We walk to the rig, we kind of take our time. And then we get there, and it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They're both 80 years old. They're all upset. And Mr. Smith is in full arrest. And Mrs. Smith is not a medically trained person. She didn't know what to do. All she did was call 911, say, my husband isn't feeling well. And then he goes unconscious in full arrest. And we've been kind of complacent about getting out and getting on the run. Then we find this person in full cardiac arrest. So there is no insignificant incident. It is after the fact, once we've been there and we determine all the facts, we mitigate the incident. We can talk about it after the fact. But when the run comes in, it's a run. It is our emergency. It is our fire. It is our responsibility. And company officers and shift work chiefs should be saying this to their people so complacency doesn't start to sneak in. And complacency is a very, very dangerous thing. And it develops over time. And it's a slow downhill process. And the problem is you don't realize you're there until you're at the bottom of the hill. You become complacent, and then you start dragging, and everything else kind of really goes sideways on you. So company officers, shift work chiefs, don't let that happen. This incident that I'm talking about, they're in a multi-station house. They were the first ones out of the house. Okay, and you know why? Because they do gear donning drills on a regular basis. And I know this for a fact because I've hung out in this firehouse and I've seen them do this. Okay, they focus on the absolute basics, because the absolute basics are the things that give us that tactical advantage on fire ground. Basics, focusing on the basics all the time, really is mission focus. Okay, it's the things that make us very, very, very good at the little mundane tasks that it's very easy to say, that's really not important, man. I know how to get my gear on. But when you got somebody laying in a smoke-filled apartment who's on the verge of dying, getting out of the firehouse 10, 15 seconds quicker could make a big difference. And it happens. I mean, people get complacent. Okay. People think that, hey, listen, I've been putting my gear on. I don't need to train on it. Well, we all do, myself included. When I was on active duty, I was doing the hot mask drills. I was doing gear donning drills, because I know, and I realize and I appreciate the fact, when I respond to an incident in a staffing limited, task saturated environment, I may have to get my hands dirty and revert to doing firefighter stuff just to make the incident go the right way. And if I got to fumble around with getting my gear on, I'm taking myself out of the fight. Okay, I'm getting behind. I want to be in the position where I can add to the incident, not detract from the incident. And it happens. I mean, people, senior people, they kind of get a little complacent, downhill slide. All these things happen. So if you're that operational officer, if you're a company officer, if you're shift work chief, gear donning drills are important. They're just not for the Proby. They're just not for the fire academy. They're for all of us who are making runs. Make sure your people are doing some drills on a regular basis to ensure that they have the proficiency in getting their gear on. It's just, the basics mean everything. Don't diminish and don't discount the basics. So that's the first thing, to talk about. Next thing to look at is, when you get this run, do you have apartment buildings in your first D local? And I'm not even going to talk about, senior citizen complexes. I'm talking about apartment buildings. Okay. If you get dispatched to that address, do you know where all the apartments are? Do you know what the configuration of the building is? If you go to apartment 8 Echo, what staircase are you going to use to get into that apartment? If there's multiple staircases, or are you just going to kind of figure it out when you get there? I know many companies, I've seen this happen. The officer's been around 25 years. They know the building like the back of their hands. It's like, okay, we got this figured out. Well, the person riding in a nozzle seat doesn't know that building. Okay, they're just going to follow the officer around, because the person in that nozzle seat has only been on the fire department for 2 years, and they've only been in this building 3 or 4 times. But that nozzle person is the one who's going to deploy the hand line. So maybe they should know that building as well as anybody else, so they can start making their decisions. Okay, what stairwell do we need to go up? Are we going to hit the standpipe? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? All those things are important to everybody on that fire ground. Okay, so knowing your local, knowing where these buildings are, knowing what the layouts are. If you have a Hampton Inn, a lot of people have Hampton Inns. Hampton Inns have very similar construction. They've got the main entrance in the middle of the building, and a lot of times they have stairwells on each end of the building. Well, how do those numbers run? And if you have a fire on the second floor, and you got a 200-foot pre-connect, do you know what the apartment numbers are? They're just adjacent to those stairwells. So when you get dispatched to apartment 2J, you realize that, hey, if we spot the rig on the Bravo side, we can run somebody through the lobby, open up that door, advance our pre-connect line up that interior stairwell, because that apartment that we're being dispatched to is right there at the stairwell. And that's the quickest way we can get a line up there. We can get water on fire, got a fireproof door that protects us in the stairwell, get that door cracked open. The door to the apartment or the hotel room is still intact. Get our line out in the hallway, make that push. That all comes from going out and looking at your first do local, knowing your local. So spend some time knowing your local. Know where these buildings are. Know where these high hazard buildings are. If you have a senior citizen apartment complex, an assisted living complex, any of those complexes in your local, that's a high hazard facility, not necessarily because of the construction, but because of the occupancy. Senior citizens have a higher risk of becoming a fire victim than the general population. So that senior complex now, in my mind, is a high hazard building. So if it's a high hazard building, I want to know everything about that building. I want to know the layout. Want to know where the stairs are. I want to know how the doors operate. Can I get in there? If I get in that stairwell, is that door closed? And can I get it open? Can I use a coat hanger or something to hit the panic hardware? Do I have that in my forced entry bag? All these questions everybody on the company should be able to answer. And they're going to be able to answer if the company officers and the shift work chiefs are talking to people about this all the time and making sure that these type of things happen. Removing this victim. I know for a fact that this company does drills all the time, in full gear, on air, forcing doors, and moving victims. I know it. I know it for an absolute fact. But how many companies are actually doing that on a regular basis? How many companies are, if nothing else, on a regular basis, practicing dragging rescue mannequins across the engine room? Okay? How many people are practicing dragging rescue mannequins across the engine room and then transferring to a two-person carry to carry the victim outside to the ambulance? And a lot of times what we're doing is we're doing our training in a single-family dwelling mindset. Okay, we're going to go to a house fire. We're going to find a victim. We're going to move them through the house. However, maybe we're going to go out through a window, because it's the shortest path or whatever. But the drill normally ends once we get the victim out of the fire building. Well, maybe what we need to do is increase the drill, so not only do we get them out of the fire building, but then we pick them up and we carry them out to the street where the ambulance is. And can we do that seamlessly? Can we transfer from dragging the victim out of the building to a two-person carry, and with our gear, still on air, run across the front yard out to the street where the ambulance is? Because that's the bottom line. Because sometimes when we go to fires, EMS is a separate agency. Okay, they get notified secondary. The fire engines eat up the block. Now all of a sudden the ambulance is 2 or 3 houses down, and they're trying to navigate their stretcher and all their stuff up to the front yard. Well, we get in there on this thing real quick. We find the victim. We get the victim out. Let's run to the ambulance with the victim instead of just waiting in the front yard for EMS to get there, load the victim up on the stretcher, and then move to the ambulance. The quicker we can cut these time frames down, the higher the probability of survival. And our ability to do this is truly a byproduct of our training, and training that we do on a regular basis. I talk about this in one of my seminars all the time. There's fire departments that do search and rescue training once or twice a year. Critical task, absolute critical task. And you're only going to train on it once or twice a year, and you may go 4, 5, 6 years and not even make an actual rescue. So not only is your training not enough to ensure that you have the proficiency, you're not getting the real world experience enough. Unless you're in an urban setting, unless you're in a busy, center city engine company, or you're working in Houston where you're making grabs all the time, or New York or Philadelphia. I mean, most of us work in suburban America. We might make 3 or 4 grabs in our entire career. So if we're going to be good at this, if we're going to have mission focus, and we're going to be tactically excellent, we got to train on this stuff all the time. So the takeaways from the incident that my friend was gracious enough to share with me is number one, gear donning drills. Okay, get out of the house quick. Get that primary position on the fire ground. Get to the fire as fast as you can so you can cut down that time curve that's working against us. So number one, gear drills. Make sure you can get your gear on so you can get out of the house. Okay. Number two, know your local. Know everything that's going on in your local. Know the layouts of these buildings. Know where the apartments are. Know how things are numbered. Know where the cross streets are. Okay. Knowing the building. Go back to this incident. They knew by the address what the door configuration was. And when they had to force the door, they were prepared for it because they knew going in exactly what they were going into. Nobody had to stop and say, hey, listen, this is going to be a metal door and a metal frame. As soon as that dispatch came out, everybody on that rig knew right away, okay, metal door, metal frame, and this is how we're going to attack that door. So think about that. Okay, knowing your buildings, knowing all the little bits and pieces of what you're going to have to do to make the operation go successfully ahead of time, not figuring it out when you get there. And I've heard officers say that a ton, man. Well, we figure it out when we get there. Well, that's bullshit. If that's the way you're operating, you're placing yourself in a bad position. You're behind the pace at which incidents grow, and you're only going to play catch up. And when you play catch up with a fire, you never win. Okay, so know the buildings, know the layouts, know what it's going to require. Train, 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 and do the comprehensive training. Just don't find the victim and bring the victim out. Find the victim and bring the victim out, and then be able to move the victim to where EMS is that can treat the victim. Hey, listen, there's a lot of good services out there, and as soon as the victim comes out, EMS is there with the stretcher. They're ready to take over patient care. If that's the environment you're working in, great, man, fantastic. But what about that day all the EMS units are busy? What about that day in a system like that, there's an MCI happening on the other side of the city? You're not on that box, but all the EMS units are at the MCI now on the far corner of the city, okay, where you have a delayed response for an EMS unit. Anyhow, you get a working fire with a victim trap. Are these bizarre scenarios? I don't really think so. I think there are things that can happen in any fire district. So if we know it can happen, let's talk about it at the kitchen table and make some plans. So gear donning drills, know your area, know the layouts of your buildings, comprehensive training from the time we locate the victim until we get the victim turned over to EMS. And if we're drilling down on those things, okay, if that's where we're spending our time in the firehouse, then you are mission focused and you will be able to deliver tactical excellence. So I just wanted to kind of share that. I mean, it's something I've been thinking about. My buddy told me about this a long, long time ago, and I've just been thinking about it. It's been kind of, brewing, and I wanted to kind of really get my thoughts in line so I could, do a video that would make sense, that would hopefully add to your abilities, that would start some good conversations in the firehouse. So as always, I appreciate your time, man. Y'all have a great day. And remember the new tagline, the comfort zone is where excellence goes to die. So don't let it happen in your firehouse. Thank you.